Well, I don't know about other members of the audience, but I feel so healed after that film. And I felt so damaged watching Henry's pictures, beautiful though they are. So I do think that we have fulfilled the spirit of the evening and also reflected what Wendell Berry wrote about in his wonderful book, which many of you may have read, called What Are People For? And if you haven't read it, I hope you will. But that's where the essays Damage and Healing first appeared. Henry, I have to ask you, why is this Damage so beautiful? There's something really powerful about the beauty of the images that you create.
Well, thank you. Of course, it begs the question, which we can't discuss unless someone brought a nice glass of bourbon, what is beauty? But let's sidestep that question. I utilize the rules of making two-dimensional art, which were essentially discovered in the Renaissance or rediscovered, to create images that are graphically beautiful. And I'm dying to know where you found that old printing press.
Monterey.
In Monterey, California?
Kentucky.
That's great sights, isn't it?
It's
Yes,
so
it is.
beautiful. Sorry. But I'm purposefully making them beautiful. I'm using these rules of two-dimensional artwork to make something beautiful out of something which is, of course, not beautiful. And it is the dissonance that's created there which makes the images effective. Because they're beautiful, one part of your brain is telling you it's beautiful, another part of your brain is telling you it's horrible, and that dissonance is why they're effective.
Laura, it seems much harder to me for you to show the pain in Henry County that's there, because it is so visually appealing, summer, winter, spring. But there were scenes that we saw, particularly the faces of the farmers, I thought were astonishingly poignant, and the fears that they have, which are with them always, that kind of stress. Will there be more of this in your film, the sense of despair that the small farmer continues to feel?
Yeah, it's part of the danger of falling in love with your subject, you know. I think that it's a good question. I think that Wendell has a way of, you know, in his words, so often it makes you hurt and hope all at the same time. There's a poignancy to the beauty. I think that I'm so used to seeing documentaries about how bad things are and how poor and desperate rural America is, that I'm more interested in the dignity of the place and the people, and I'm more interested in showing beauty that is still preserved, real beauty, not necessarily just aesthetic beauty, you know, but I'm more interested and compelled by that than I am the brokenness. But I think, you know, the brokenness and the beauty are one and the same, and I think it's a matter of how to frame it, you know, to see what you want to see in it, to move where you want to go from that place, if that makes sense.
It does. Henry, I want to ask you to repeat for the audience a story that you tell in your book about taking the train home from Manhattan to the suburb where you live, and the experience of walking home from the station while all of your well-to-do neighbors see you. Tell us that story just a little bit.
Well, it's funny where our heads are in our world in the USA today. We're all terrified of terrorists, but you won't die from a terrorist. You will die from a refrigerator falling on you before you will die from a terrorist. The story that we're referring to is that of, again, by virtue of taking these pictures, I have been forced to change my behavior. And one of the things I did, I was living in a wealthy suburb north of Manhattan. I would hitchhike to work. To the train. And people said, now remember, we're in a wealthy suburb, we're in Westchester. Nothing, I will not be raped, murdered, robbed, or anything in Westchester. But I was astonished at the amount of indignation, fear, shock, and awe, because I was hitchhiking the 10 miles to get the suburban commuter train. And I was also fascinated by the people who would roar by in their giant vehicles and give me looks of disgust at this person in his blue jeans hitchhiking to the commuter train. And I'm always obsessed by, okay, and we all do it. Was it Wendell Berry that said we're all guilty? We are all guilty. And of course, but there are these people who are very well to do zooming by in their gas guzzling cars, and these are the things which are doing us in. And I always wondered, the story he refers to is me standing there while these people zoom by and thinking, yeah, but that's just it. You're zooming by, you're not helping your neighbor, you're zooming by in your gas guzzling car, and yes.
There's one other thing in that segment of the book that you refer to, and ever since I read it, I have been unwilling to have a bottle of water. And why would that be that I would be so unwilling to do that?
Well, first off, don't get me started.
Well, that's what I want.
First off, a third of the volume of a bottle of water in oil is used to get that bottle of water into your hand. That's I think that's the factoid. But more recently, my new obsession is BPA. And of course, plastic leaches BPA into whatever it contains. So aside from the oil used, the climate change, and all of those things, and by the way, the water loss caused by these giant water companies moving into communities and sucking up the groundwater is the fact that you're taking in BPA. I will not cook out of a pan with nonstick coating, and I won't consume food or water out of plastic.
Good for you. But I'm guilty too of some of those things, and I mean,
we all are.
You have to become aware, and that's one of the values of the work that you're doing, I think. Both of you. Laura, tell us a little bit about the experience of going into a place like Henry County as an outsider, and what it was like. Were people a little bit hesitant to talk to you initially? And how did you break that down?
They're still hesitant. Yeah, Kentucky's an interesting place. My family's from Mississippi and Louisiana, and I found working in the Deep South a lot easier than working in Kentucky. Yeah, I mean, I just think that Kentucky, I love Kentucky, but yeah, people make you earn it. They don't just give it to you. And I knew Wendell was like that. I mean, he makes me earn it every single time I see him. It's as if the first time I met him and I have to work really hard for the next 2 hours to have any worth whatsoever. And I appreciate that. But I feel like most people here are that way, and it seems like a cultural thing. I don't think it's just being out in a rural area. Although I did hear someone say today that we were talking about this issue and said that people out in like rural Kentucky, they really are very mistrusting of people from Louisville.
Oh, yes.
And that it didn't matter who it was just that dichotomy. Yeah. So that's, I'm sure, a part of it. I don't have a whole lot of experience in the city. My experience is really out there. But I have found also that people in Kentucky are not, people out there at least, are not terribly impressed with the camera or the fact that you're making a movie, that's quite a liability. And it takes a while. So, but my approach is I'm there for the long haul. Documentary is certainly is like the art form of endurance. And so I keep coming back and back and back and back and hang out and stay and humble myself and go through great pains to be there. And over time, there is an opening and a trust that's building, but you have to earn it big time here.
That's interesting. Documentaries, although they're hard to do and they're often hard to sell, I think there's a growing market for them now. And the fact that Netflix, for instance, has whole channels devoted to documentaries is really quite exciting. How long will your film be when it's finished?
I would guess around 80 minutes, somewhere in there.
Have you ever tried doing motion pictures, Henry, or have you stuck to stills?
A little bit. Filmmaking is, I've done enough of it to have the greatest respect for anyone who can. It's an impossible thing. It does. I'm lucky in that I'm essentially a one-man band with the people who fly me or whatever. So I don't have to worry about will the cameraman show, or will he have or she have a good day, or will the So I don't understand how they ever get done.
Well, I did think that Wendell's quote at the beginning that you played was fascinating, and the idea of putting together the pieces, whether it be words in a poem or whether it be images from a strip of film, or I guess today it would be a digital image from whatever, or all the pieces of film that you have to edit together in order to make a movie.
Yeah.
How do you keep all that straight in your mind? I mean,
I don't. It's a jumbled mess. No, I do edit my own films, and it takes a long time. And Wendell often gives me a hard time about the fact that this film's taking me years upon years, aside from the fact that I keep having children. But I told him that, he's a member of every slow movement there is. So this is the movement of slow filmmaking. And I have to examine, I could hire an editor. That would probably be a wiser thing to do. But instead, I edit it all myself. And so because I want to know it, I need to know it. I need to understand it and feel it and experience and see how I think it naturally fits together. I think a lot of filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, are really out with a political agenda, and I'm not. I think that I'm interested in the complexities and learning about things and trying to see the world differently than the way I see it. So I go into a film with ideas, and I hope to get completely lost and confused and turned around and find my way out, so that the process itself transforms the way I see it. So it's messy and expensive and very slow.
Yeah. And do your sons get in there and mess up the pieces?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Are you shooting film?
No, we're shooting, we're shooting on HD.
Yeah.
But, it feels like film in the way you edit it, because the software that I use, I don't know if this is interesting to anybody, we could talk, but it simulates film. So you're actually editing the frames. It's just you're not doing it on a Steenbeck, you're doing it with a mouse and a keypad. That's how I work, at least. So it is like a puzzle of many, many thousands of photographs.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, with sound to complicate things.
And it does.
Henry, we just mentioned some of the problems Laura had with the people in Henry County, but I would think that any industrialist who sees you coming would call out the guards or the dogs or something. Do you have to be pretty sneaky to get around it? I heard you mention you were in the woods at one point.
Of course, most of this is done aerially. So I swoop in and am gone before they are able to marshal the dogs. I have had the FBI waiting for me when I get on the ground when, for instance, I was circling repeatedly over a refinery and they called in the tail number of the plane and they tracked that down to the airport from whence. And it's happened more than once, and they questioned me extensively, but I'm pretty transparent. I'm an artist. There's nothing. If somebody with bad intention wants a tool, well, Google Earth is much more illustrative of what is where than I am. I'm making art.
Most of your photos that I saw, at least in the book that we have on sale in the lobby and that these pictures are from, are in the eastern half of the United States. Do you limit your travels to this part of the country, or do you do the whole
Not
world?
At all. As a matter of fact, I travel around the world. I decided to make the book a narrative about the project. And the project started on the Mississippi River in what's known as Cancer Alley, which is, I love the Mississippi for what it represents to us as a nation. So many things. I won't even start. One of the things I want to do is the lost slave towns that were swept aside by the industries that moved into the area. But that's why the book focuses mostly on the eastern, and I'm from the southeast.
So interestingly enough, when I was talking about my own journey of despair, when I was in grad school, I'm from New Orleans, and I made a film called Green about the environmental racism along Cancer Alley. And we rented a helicopter and shot aerial film above all of those refineries, like in Baton Rouge. And you can see the proximity of the little former slave plantations against the ginormous quality of the plant. So we should exchange notes.
I found one of my deep throats is a man who used to work in the government in Baton Rouge.
Is it Willie Fontenot? It is, right?
You just said deep throat.
Well, he knows everything.
He does.
He knows everything. You can show him a picture of anything, and he'll say, "Oh yeah, that's the Bassif plant."
And he's legally blind.
And he's legally blind.
Yeah, he's a blind photographer.
He's a wonderful. It's too funny.
That's cool. Yeah.
I guess everybody finds their way into Willie and Mary's house, and yeah.
I've always wondered, and I should have asked Mary this at some point, or Wendell, but do they have air conditioning in their house? Oh, they do?
But they have a lot of solar panels.
Okay. And how do they heat it?
I don't know.
Just curious.
It's warm. They have a furnace in their living room.
Yeah. In Kentucky, a lot of the rural areas have thrived in some ways because of air conditioning, because the summers here can be pretty sultry. Not as bad as Mississippi, but they can be pretty warm, and they've gotten warmer in the last few decades because of global warming. When you go into Newcastle in the town, do you find that the people in the town are different from the people in the country? Because the Berrys talk so much about community and how they're woven together. Do you sense that, or do you sense a difference between the farmers
and the
townspeople?
No, I think it's all sort of the same thing there, because the town is so teeny tiny, you know? I mean, the town seems to be where, like, we were there today filming a group of young farmers, but we filmed them in the county judge's office. And when we were standing in the front yard, 3 of my main characters walked by in the course of about 30 minutes, because they were it was great. And they were dropping off paperwork or running errands or dropping their kid at preschool. So I think that in these communities, you know, the rural communities, the town is a kind of hub for certain kinds of activity, banking, legal work, school. So I think there's a wholeness in community there that is so inspiring, even though the old-timers there will tell you how much it's changed and how much they're losing. I still see it as a place where there's something truly preserved, in contrast to a place like Austin, where everything kind of feels fractured and there isn't that sense of wholeness. There, you know, everybody knows everybody, and neighbors are neighbors, and there's something preserved and something I am very inspired by. But I don't see that different. I mean, the town, Newcastle, and the farms around it seem to be part of the same thing, rather than the dichotomy versus like Newcastle versus Louisville.
Right. The theme of our festival is Sacred Earth, Sacred Self. What can you tell us from your art about what it means to be a sacred self? What is sacred selfhood? You want to start, Henry?
Well, I'm not a religious person, but I do believe there's something more, which many people attribute to God or specific religion. But I do believe that the body is a temple, the body is sacred, the body is also a mirror of the larger world. And And I believe firmly in the connectedness of everything. And what we do to our bodies, and I also believe in responsibility and do unto others. And what we do to our bodies is what we should do to the larger world, for the larger world, and for others. And which of course has all of this has been informed by what I do and the research involved, and has, as I said, affected the way I live.
I don't have an answer, but I have some thoughts. I think a lot about that in the context of working on this film, because it's like, how do you define self? And one of the big reasons that I understand why Wendell doesn't want to film about him is because he would say, I am nothing without those people around me to whom I'm connected. And I think in our increasingly urban lives, it's much more vain. It's much more about what you're wearing and who you are and your Facebook and your social media identity, and there's this kind of overwhelming narcissism in our culture today that I do not see when I am in the places I'm in right now, because I think people are much more defined by their need for one another and their place in the natural order of providing things from the bounty God's given us. So I think that there's a much healthier sense of self in these places that our larger fancy culture kind of disregards. There's a secret there about self that I'm only kind of getting glimpses of and trying to learn about.
Well, I think both of you, through your art, are helping us to understand ourselves and who we are as people on this earth. And we're about ready to get questions from the audience, but while we have a moment, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
And for sharing these beautiful things with us, and also making us aware of the horror that mankind have created. So maybe we could have some lights and some questions. I remember Wendell was doing this last night, and I know how he felt. Yes, down on
Thank
the first
you.
row.
I want to thank you for the lens of your heart, because I think that's what you see through your heart with all of your pictures. J. Henry, this is for you. You've been all over the world and taken pictures of some pretty awful things. Is there any place in our world that you see as still pristine or still lovely to look at from an airplane?
That sort of touches to the question of, is there hope? There's so many beautiful places. There's a great man, dead now, Dave Foreman, who started an organization called the Wildlands Institute, who I work with. The Wildlands Institute, not Dave Foreman. And I read something he wrote about being in Alaska and saying, wow, this is what it's supposed to be like. No, we humans have changed everything. There is still great beauty. I'm from the South, I love the South. I'm hearing these things about Henry County, which makes me want to go there and see it. There is great beauty, and there is much that is to be celebrated and enjoyed. The human animal has pretty much changed everything. It's what we do. And yes, there's a lot that's beautiful that I see that makes me almost weep. Please don't let that be destroyed also. Yeah, but there are many places. Let's hope we can stop ourselves.
Besides Alaska, could you name one?
I'm particularly fond of the Southeast. There's a large wild area in South Carolina called the Ace Basin. It refers to the area where three rivers, I think it's the largest relatively intact wild area on the East Coast, where three rivers come together, the Ashepoo, the Combahee, and the Edisto. And it's one of my favorite places. My family is trying to resuscitate the longleaf pine. which is near and dear to my heart. So yeah, but do we all look to home? Mm-hmm. Do we all look to where we were born as I think we almost do, don't we? Mm-hmm.
I think that's
But
right.
yeah, I'd love to see more of Kentucky.
Thank you, we hope you will.
Thank you.
Another question, please.
My question is for Laura. I'm a transplant to Kentucky, and while I despise smoking in the tobacco industry, I've become pretty fascinated with the tobacco farming history. And I'm curious if you chose tobacco specifically for your film, or if that just happens to be the environment that Wendell's in.
Yeah, it's the environment. I didn't set out to do a film about tobacco, and yet I think I too have become quite moved by the culture around tobacco. I mean, there's the plant itself, which is pretty fascinating, but I think it's the culture around the tobacco farming that Wendell writes so beautifully about. And I see it. I see what he's writing about, that because it's a handmade craft, it still cannot be mechanized. They're trying, but they just can't quite mechanize it. And there is a handmade craft to it. Of course, that's changing dramatically now because so much of it's run by contracts and Philip Morris, and that's a whole nother story. But one thing I would say about it that I'm compelled about is that I'm used to documentary film world. The scene around documentary films is quite about political correctness. And so I love that I tried to tell them, yes, I'm making a film about, white male tobacco farmers in the South and how beautiful they are. It's kind of as Wendell would have it, right? If they think you're going to go right, go left, because it's very much a disregarded culture. It's a throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I have learned from the Berrys mainly, and then the farmers that I'm around, that there's so much to be learned from that art and that craft and that culture that really has been quite disregarded.
Another question, please.
I don't know quite how to ask the question, and yet if I can, I'm curious if you might know what an andon cord is.
An andon cord?
Mm-hmm. In industrialization and running the Ford plant or Toyota, the andon cord is the one that the worker can stand up and pull, and that shuts down the whole assembly line, the system.
Oh, wow.
So to ask you a little bit of how would you see a populist farmers movement get hold of its andon cord?
Interesting question.
And then my second question, or would y'all like to stay on this one? Isn't it just a little bit strange for Wendell Berry to be looking out a window, not just a window, but one whole window that has 40 panes? Why 40?
I asked him that. I said, is there any significance to the number whatsoever? And he said, no. I was searching for some mystical answer, and he said no. But it is an interesting fact, isn't it?
So if you're looking at nature through systems thinking, you begin to realize the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. So you got all of these economies working and trying to pay the debts, but how do you get the solitude, the integrity of the small farmer to coalesce without putting the money into the political machinery that begins to tilt towards the big operations that drain the money very quickly out of its operations?
Well, I think Steve Smith, he's the farmer who tells his story about being a tobacco farmer and then saying, this is not going to work, and finding another path. That's why I love his story so much. And he's Wendell's son-in-law, by the way. But I love that story so much because it shows you a way to, you're not trapped within a certain way of thinking. If you're willing to take that leap and put down the way everyone else is going and try to imagine something different, there are possibilities. And within 15 years, he paid off his farm. He's out of debt. He's great, you know. And whereas a lot of the other farmers, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They never get out of debt, and it's a different picture. So I think that's a good example that it is possible. It's not just a fait accompli that there's no way to get out.
Let's see, when I was a child about your age, I would be working down in the cotton country, trying to teach school in Helena. And there was an article written about building the Slackwater Harbor, but there's this wonderful lady farmer who owned probably a couple 100,000 acres, the bank and the implement company. But she realized that she could begin to make more money by not using as much pesticide. It wasn't the volume of cotton, it was the cost of what went in to yield a crop. So in junior and high school, she paid for the Philadelphia Orchestra to come to Arkansas for its sesquicentennial. And it was such a fascinating experience to see that. So I would wonder, as I would write as a senior in the Central High about Appalachian folk music, how do you get or appeal to the folk song players? Really, the songs are being sung, and they're in the meals that are broken. How do you coalesce and then pull the sort of humor that rural people love to do and can pull it off with the fidelity, integrity that everyone says, we did this ourselves? It's not one person. We're sort of channeling a spirit. And to do it well.
That's a really good thought, and I'm afraid we're going to have to stop here.
Thank you.
Because I have just a few moments left to remind you of tomorrow's program, and it is an exciting one. You'll notice from your program that we will again begin with guided meditation led by Gerardo Abud. Be here at 9 o'clock for that. Then at 10:30, we're going to have a really interesting program called Just Sustainabilities, Reimagining Equality and Living Within Limits. And our guide for this will be Dr. Julian Agerman from Tufts University. He's internationally known for his research in this area. And we're going to have a really good local panel with him to discuss some of the issues that he raises, including Jean Dunlop, Teresa Zawacki, and Ted Smith. Then tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have a session with the Bioneers. And many of you are aware of their full spectrum leadership for engaged action, body, mind, and spirit. We'll have Kenny Ausubel and Nina Simons here tomorrow afternoon, 2:30 p.m. And at noon, at 12:30, there will be a seminar, Sacred Living Within the Home. It's a 1.5-hour workshop, and we will explore ways that we can use intention, prayer, and ritual to bring spiritual presence and sacredness to mundane family dynamics. Sounds like we could all use that session. It will be at 12:45 tomorrow up on the mezzanine. So now we have just a few minutes left. I wanted to ask each of you if you had a 1-minute parting shot. Is there something that you would like to leave with us tonight that we haven't covered? Laura?
Not really. I'm really tired.
Okay.
But I do want to say thank you. It's been really nice
We
to
want
be
to say
here.
thank you to you. Henry?
Well, I'm by nature a soapbox preacher. And I guess my parting shot would be turn off the lights when you leave the room.
Oh.